Hi traders, welcome to the shapes lesson. In this lesson, I will show you how you can use the plot shape function to plot shapes directly onto your chart. So the script you see in front of you right now is almost a blank script. All I've done is I have written two lines of code here, created two variables, two Boolean variables, higher close and lower close. Higher close will only be true if the current bar's closing price is higher than the previous bar's high. And lower close will only be true if the current close is lower than the previous bar's low. And then I have the plot shape function here that is plotting a shape whenever higher close is true. And that is what these blue shapes are on my chart. So you can draw shapes into their own box like we have here. I've got the overlay setting disabled. But for today's lesson, let's set overlay to true and we will draw these shapes above and below the bars on our chart. So let me close this script and add it back onto my chart. And let's start playing around with the plot shape function. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's uncomment this second line of code here. And we'll be plotting X's above both higher closes and lower closes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to title these plots. So I'll call this a higher close and this lower close. The next thing I will do is let's change the style of this shape. To do that, we just type in style equals shape dot control space, and here is the list of inbuilt shapes we can use in our scripts. So I'm going to go with triangle up for a higher close and triangle down for a lower close. I need to fix that typo there. So higher close will be shape dot triangle up. That's my favorite shape to use for detecting candlestick patterns. I usually use triangle up and triangle down to identify long and short signals in my scripts. I think it's the best shape for that. I'll explain why. Let's set the other plot shape to arrow down and save the script. So now we have these triangle up shapes for higher closes and triangle down shapes for lower closes. The reason why I like using triangles instead of the arrows is because of this. If I start scrolling out my chart, notice that our blue arrows have shrunk quite significantly, while our triangles are still the same size that they were when we were zoomed right in, or at least much closer. So the arrow shape does decrease in size as you zoom out. The triangle does so at a much less significant rate. So it's obviously a matter of preference what you use, but I'm going to go with triangle down for now. And just before we move on, let's have a quick sneak peek at some of these other shapes we have. We've got circles, we have crosses, and we have diamonds. What else? We have flags and label down. Let's see what they look like. So label down looks pretty cool as well for detecting long and short trades. That would not be a bad choice. We also have X cross, which is the default shape. So if you don't specify a style, the style will default to shape.xcross. But let's change these back to triangle up and triangle down. Now, the next thing I need to do is I want to move the triangle up below the bar, and notice that the shape draws above the bar by default. So technically we don't need to change the lower close location, but we do need to change our triangle up location. To do that, we just type the location parameter. So location equals location dot control space. And here are our options. Let's go over all of them before we move on. First one is above bar. That's the default parameter or setting for this function. The next one is absolute. Let's see what that does. Save the script. Now our shapes are drawing at the very bottom of our chart. And I think what this does is it actually draws at the price you specify. So if I were to say here, high close question mark, draw the shape at 70,000, otherwise draw nothing. Let's save the script and see if I'm right about that. And yes, that is exactly what is happening. You can see that our shapes are now drawing at 70,000 here on Bitcoin. And so the absolute location uses a price value for when you plot the shape. But let's get rid of this and see what some of the other locations are. The next one is below bar. That's the one we want for this shape. But let's check these two out first. Bottom will put the shape at the bottom of your chart display down here. So no matter how zoomed out your chart is or how you've scaled your chart, the shapes will be drawn along the bottom of your chart. And same with top. Top will do the same thing, but at the top of your chart. Ta-da! So let's change this to bottom, below bar, and save the script. So now we are getting triangle ups drawing beneath higher closed candles and triangle downs drawing above lower closed candles. So that's exactly what I want to happen here. Obviously, we could specify location equals location dot above bar here if we want to, but that is redundant because this is the default setting for this shape anyway. So let's not do that for now. And let's look at some of the other parameters we have. The first one is color. So color works the same way as it does in all plots in PineScript. We can set it to any color, so color.rgb, a hexadecimal color, or an inbuilt color if you want to. I'm going to set it to color.green since a higher close is technically a bullish pattern. And let's set our lower close to color.red since that is bearish. Save the script. And there we go. We now have green and red arrows. Before we move on, one other thing to mention is that you can apply transparency to your shapes if you want to. I could set my triangle down to 50% transparent, and now they're a little bit more faded. I don't think I've ever used transparency in my shape plots because if you're plotting shapes onto your chart, normally you want them to be as visible as possible. But the option to apply transparency is there if you need to, as it is with all plots, all functions that plot displays onto your chart in PineScript, including tables. And I'm not sure about labels, but we'll cover that when we get to the labels lesson. So let's move on to the rest of these function parameters. The next one is offset. Now you should be familiar with offset by now. It applies the same way to all of our plots. Offset just shifts the plot X amount of bars to the left for a negative number and X amount of bars to the right for a positive number. And you'll have to excuse me, I get quite bored sometimes when I'm pumping out these lessons. I've recorded a lot of lessons today and I'm getting a little bit tired of my own voice. But let's move on. The next parameter we have to work with, as I said, is offset. Let's have a quick look at that. Before we do that, because this line is getting quite long, this line of code, it's not considered good practice to have your code go too far off your screen. Now, some of my scripts do this just because I like to keep my the lines of code in my script as short as possible, but it is not considered good practice to do that. If you're publicly publishing scripts, you may want to wrap this code onto multiple lines. So let me show you how to do that. And I think that's what this vertical line in the middle of our editor is for. You're supposed to keep your code to the left of this line, just so it's easier to read on multiple screen resolutions. I ignore it mostly in my own script. It's obviously optional to do that. But for now, let's wrap this code onto multiple lines. To do that, I'm going to start with this code here. I'm going to hit enter, tab, and then space. You need to add a space after your tab in order to avoid compile errors. If I save the script, this code works just fine. If I get rid of that space though, and I save the script, we get this weird error. I'm not sure why PineScript have designed it to be that way, but just keep that in mind. So now that we have our tab and space, we can move all of these parameters onto their own line. And you can even move this bracket down if you want to. And so now we have all of our parameters separated onto their own lines. We'll do the same for this too, because we might as well keep this consistent. And now I'll just add some white space to the bottom of my chart and bring this up a little bit higher. And let's go over some of these other parameters. So the next one was offset. If I set this to, let's set it to 20. Save the script. We are now offsetting our higher close candles 20 bars to the right. So if I count out 20 bars here, this bar right here is drawing on this bar right here because that is 20 bars to the right. So that's what offset does. If you set it to a negative number, it'll shift it to the left. Let's get rid of that for now though. We'll have a quick look at text. Text is an important parameter because we could say here HC, let's just do HC, short for high close, and we'll do the same for our lower close. We'll set text equals LC. Now when I save this code, we'll be getting text drawing onto our chart. So this is a good way to visually identify different candlestick patterns if you want to. It does add a little bit more clutter to your chart, so that's obviously a matter of preference, but we'll leave that in for now. Let's look at the next parameter, which is text color. So this changes the color of the text, obviously. Let's change it to color.white and see what that looks like. Text color equals color.white. Save the script. And there we go. That actually looks a little bit better, I think. Let's keep moving on. The next parameter we have to work with is editable. Now, as you might know by now, if you've watched the previous lessons in this course, I don't like the editable parameter. I don't like restricting the customization of my scripts. I like my users to be able to do whatever they want, but if you want to stop your users from being able to edit the style of your shapes, so here we are on the style menu. Now that I've set our higher close plot shape to false, editable to false, we can only edit the lower close shape here. But I like to leave editable as true, which it is by default, obviously, because then the user can change what they want in the settings menu. So don't use editable unless you are a control freak. And let's move on to size. Size is also an important one. If I set size to size dot control space or command space on a Mac, here are our options. So by default, it is set to auto. All of our plot shapes are set to auto, which means they will scale with your chart zoom. If I set it to huge, let's see how big that gets. Save the script. And they're not wrong. That is a huge shape. It actually looks something like a drawing of mountains. You'd be surprised what you can achieve with a bit of boredom and playing around with some of these shapes and colors. You can get your charts looking pretty close to a Bob Ross painting. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these others. If I set it to normal and save the script, this is quite large still. But the whole point of being able to override the size is that if I zoom my chart right out, the shapes all stay the same size. Whereas if you leave it on the default auto, then the size adapts as you zoom in or out your chart. Let's just have a quick look at tiny before we move on. Doesn't look that tiny to me. I guess when you zoom in, it is. That's definitely much smaller. But as you zoom your chart out and the lower close shapes scale down because they're set to auto, they become a similar size. And in fact, if we zoom right out, they're bigger than our lower close candles, even though they're set to tiny, because the tiny is not scaling with our chart. And obviously the tiny size has more of an effect when you're zoomed in on your chart. So that is our size parameter. What do we have next? Show last and display. So show last is just how many bars to show this plot shape on over recent price action. So if I set this to 10, so we only have 3 higher closes here. So when you set show last to a given number, in this case 10, that means we are only drawing higher closes on the last 10 most recent bars on our chart. So that's what show last is for. The final one is display. So display, I believe this parameter is in most plots, if not all of them. So plot shapes, plot characters, the standard plot function, anything that draws a shape or a line onto your chart, you can set display to display dot, and then here are your options. Display.all or display.none. By default, it's set to display.all. If you override it to display.none, then all of our higher close shapes will disappear. And the only way to get them back is to come up to the settings menu and tick this little box to display this shape. So if I click that, all of our higher closes come back. If I tick them both off, they are both set to display.none, and we have nothing drawing onto our chart. So that is it for the plot shape function. We will be using this quite frequently in our scripts. I use the plot shape function in all of my setup detection scripts, so you'll get quite used to this function throughout the course. I rarely use more than a few of these parameters, but the course wouldn't be complete without a complete rundown of the available options to you. So that's what this lesson was. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in the next one. Good luck with your coding. Good luck with your trading. Speak soon.